Hi, good evening. My name is Brock Heath, Recreation and Parks Committee. It is 5:49 on Monday, May 9th. And to my left is Mr. Tremblay, and to my right is Mrs. Oda. And we're going to be discussing kind of an ongoing recommendation here during this process. We've met several times in the past here. I think we've got a lot of questions answered. There might be a few more questions out there, but it looks like this is kind of the next step here. So, Mr. Titterington, do you have any further information since the last time?
Yes, sir. You should have all received, on Monday night, you passed a resolution asking for the county auditor to certify the amount of millage that would be required to collect $1 million per year. You should have received that certified receipt from Matt Gerhardt, and he is certifying 2.01 mils to collect that amount based on the assessed value of property in Troy. And with that in mind, then the second step of the process would be a recommendation to the council to start the actual process to put a question on the ballot on behalf of the requesting group, which is Operation Recreation, in the amount of 2.1 mils. If 2.01 mils, excuse me, if the council does not want that amount or wanted to look at another amount instead of that, then they would have to go back to and pass another resolution and ask the auditor to certify a different amount based on a different amount than the $1 million, in other words. So that is one option, although with the time element to get it onto the ballot without doing emergency legislation or suspending the rules and not going a full 3 readings on that second part, that would be impossible unless you were going to shorten up the second step of that process. So then the other two options are to recommend to council to put the question on the ballot on their behalf, or your other recommendation could be to just decide not to do that.
Right.
Just to summarize, the goal or the request of the group is for a $14.8 million project that encompasses new ball fields, additional soccer fields, some capital improvements to the Senior Citizen Center, as well as the renovation of the clubhouse at the golf course and the addition of a driving range, the capital costs of that. The proposal by the group is basically a 50-50 split. The levy proceeds would cover approximately 50%, a little bit more, and then their objective would be to fundraise, get grants, foundation support, etc., for the remaining 49 to 50%, depending on how the numbers come out, because right now they're estimates. I will reiterate that, as we've said all along, this is a request that they are making. This is not coming from the city administration. This is not a city council-led effort. It is our property, and it's been no secret that the property that is now known as Duke North, the farmland that we purchased, the idea all along was a combination of green space and some additional recreation baseball fields to support bringing them back into Troy and away from the Nuke fields in Concord Township. However, beyond that, this is the grassroots organization and their request. If the amount that is collected, either the levy doesn't pass, if you do in fact put it on, or there's less fundraising, whatever might happen, we would assess whether we could prorate those projects back and still do a substantial enough project, or ultimately we could just decide, no, we're not going to do the project because it doesn't make sense or is not feasible or cost effective to do it, in which case we would simply continue to maintain that property as farmland. It is it is being advertised for bid right now to be farmed until such time as conditions change or resources change, and we look at it again.
Makes sense. Thank you for the background on that. I believe the last couple meetings when we were looking at the estimated numbers, without the certification, it was going to cost the taxpayers about $70 per 100,000. Is that still accurate based on the new certified exact numbers?
It is. By my math, it would be $70.35 for a property or a house that is worth $100,000.
Okay. Are there any questions further from either of the committee members?
Well, I had a couple. Now, this, you say city-owned land, but is it actually owned by the city or is it owned by the park board?
It's city-owned land.
City-owned. But the park board is responsible for, what are they responsible for?
Well, ultimately, they could be responsible for the maintenance and the operations, and,
Okay.
and as you might recall, at the work session, the park board was here. They did unanimously support and recommend this, recognizing that there needed to be some consideration for the worst case, additional maintenance that the park operations department would have to provide. And follow-up documentation to you, we did discuss with the park superintendent what additional needs would be or could be, and again, worst case, not assuming that any of the grassroots organizations could or would provide some of that support. Worst case, it was approximately $25,000 a year in additional temporary seasonal staffing that he would need to help maintain the additional land.
So it would be reasonable to ask or expect the kind of services they provide on their own fields, possibly on the new fields.
Yes.
And as far as the cost, we would, if the levy passes it, we would be receiving the monies over 10 years, but we would be having the construction go over in a year or two. So there would be debt service on, we'd have to borrow some money.
Correct.
So, but so the 10 million would cover the debt service plus the cost of construction. It's a moving target. There's percentages that we would have to borrow at, and construction costs, they're both moving at all times.
Well, we would have, ideally, we would bond the project out once we at least had final estimates, if not bids, formal bids submitted. Ideally, we would have those bids submitted and available when we bond it out, and then would be able to reimburse our fund balance for that amount over over the 10-year period. So, yes, the project could be completed within a couple of years, depending on how we would step it out and time it. And then you're correct. The maximum would be payment over 10 years, which is what we would expect the question to go on the ballot to be limited to.
Okay. That's the ones I had, the questions I had.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Oda?
I sent several questions out right before this meeting, and Patrick's already answered them, but I'm just and the one question was, will these new fields that we're considering taxing property owners for be open to the public? The rec board would decide that?
Well, the rec board would handle those fields like they do our fields now,
Are those fields
which are all
locked?
available for anybody. They just, you have to schedule them. It's not first come, first serve, except that you go through them to schedule them. That makes sure that we don't have overlap and people wanting to come and practice and get into disputes over who deserves the field at that particular hour. That's something that we've always done with the fields that we do have in Troy, not only the baseball but the soccer fields. My answer there was they would just do that the same way. Now, one of the other options that is being looked at, but hasn't really been explored that much, is the possibility that maybe there'd be an outside firm that would manage the fields. However, if that option was to be entertained and bid out and contracted, that would be something the council would have to look at. And as a matter of, as one of the conditions of the contract, the council could include that condition, that it has to be available to all of the citizens in Troy, which would be very reasonable to expect. So either way, I guess the point is that these are public fields and they would be expected to be open to the public for the Troy taxpayers.
Another question is, why is the city not proposing this? Why do we have another group? I don't know who wants to answer that. Why is there an outside group? Why
Well,
is it-
I'll give you the reason from the Operation Recreation side. The city, we have a list of priorities of stuff, whether it's streets, sidewalks, property maintenance, or water plant, or whatever. And sometimes, we have a situation at the golf course that the building hasn't been looked at since the 1980s. We've had tentative plans and pro formas drawn up for the driving range over there for at least as long as I've been on council, 6.5 years. But Mr. Green, the director over there, indicated that he had looked at this for the last 10 or 15 years. We have the need of the soccer fields at the McDade property at the south end of Duke Park that has been talked about for the last 10 plus years. So some of these things, they just get laid by the wayside, even though there are needs there. Money is one item, or a time, or just no will to take on the project. Now, with Troy Junior Baseball having the extreme circumstances that they've had the last few years, 2 years ago they expended over $100,000 that they had to fundraise to repair that property out there and put it back into playing shape for the kids. They have a situation because of the septic tanks that they do not have bathroom facilities for the kids except for porta potties that they have to bring in. So cleanliness and sanitation is a kind of an issue out there. They have been advised by their donor list that they are not going to receive any more money because it's just like flushing money down the septic tank. So that has come up very prominently. A couple of years ago, 2014, the idea of the Miracle League handicap accessible baseball field came into play by a small group of folks here in town. And I was asked to join that a month or so after they kind of formed, and was elected the president. So that is a very near and dear item to my heart for handicapped accessibility on some issues, and this was just really a great project. So learning more about Troy Junior Baseball, it became quite evident that it was a natural hand-in-glove partnership that could be placed there for baseball for the entire family, regardless of ability. And so doing that research and learning more history about Newfield and that sort of thing, it just kind of made sense to kind of come forward. And then with the Miami County Parks District that was looking at the Hewells Camp Farm, and then the partnership that was formed there with the city to purchase that land, it just kind of fell into place that seemed like a natural place to put this thing. So with the needs of Troy Junior Baseball, and then having my personality of just wanting to get things done for folks, it kind of made sense to do that. So that was the impetus to start moving forward on this.
And so why not wait a year? And it does feel rushed. I mean, everybody, I think, feels a little rushed. Why not wait another year, do some community?
Well, you've got politics that plays into it. you've got organizations, political entities that are looking at ballot issues in the next couple of years. And you start looking at those or hearing about those, and do you want to put all of the levy items or renewals or other things on the ballot at the same time? And you can inundate people, and you could actually shoot yourself in the foot for doing that sort of thing. So it's just happenstance on timing when finding out these things are coming to the fore, particularly, well, with a couple of entities that are looking at things. So we approached City, and when Mrs. Knight did the backtracking of finding out when the date for November would be, it just put us under the gun. So we were, with some plans that the city has done, plans that Miracle League has, we just kind of started moving forward. And it has fallen where it is. There's nothing going to change off of the information that we have now in a year from now, except it takes a year for these fields to grow in. So they're going to sit for a year. So if we put it off for a year, then that means 3 years down the road that the kids will actually start playing on it. So interest rates are low now with the bond market. It makes sense to do that. We know and we've seen here in council that construction costs are continuing to go up dramatically because of worker non-availability and that sort of thing. So again, it only made sense to kind of move forward, and we've taken baby steps in this thing, and now we're at a point where we suggested bringing this before the citizens of Troy to vote on. It's not something that's being rammed down anybody's throat, because the citizenry are going to be the determining factors of this. I mean, they're either going to be for it or not. So we decided to move forward, present it, and that's what has led to where we are today.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about it. I have a lot of people, different issues that people say, hey, we want to vote on this. And this is one of those things where they would get to vote on it. So that's all I have right now.
Thank you, Mrs. Oda. And I agree, it did feel rushed at the beginning of that first meeting, but I think from then, since then we've had several meetings, a lot of correspondences go out, a lot of information that helps me and other people feel more comfortable with what's happening here. This is obviously an item of a lot of importance. We'd love to hear from any of the other city council members at this time. Mrs. Snee?
Any questions at this time?
Any other council members in the audience? Any city staff in the audience would like to make any comments? Looks like you're about to stand up. Mr. Kendall, would please approach the microphone. I do. I'm going to make everybody walk. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the
Oh,
for
trying to remember my name.
allowing me to speak here. My name is Tom Kendall. I'm
Yep.
First Ward Councilman. I live at 937 Terry Drive. So, I have, like Robin said, I've had quite a few conversations and phone calls this past week regarding this, and I did promise that I would ask some of the questions and make them public. One was, how did we come to have a figure of $1.5 million for the golf course when, in essence, the general feeling out there of the people who are golfing, it needs a lot more than that on the clubhouse in order to make it a viable clubhouse and area where people can go eat and use as a facility. So that was one question. Second question, which Mr. Titterington did allude to, that if there is not enough money raised, the question is how do you determine which organization gets the money designated to it? And the point that was made to me is that people would like to know that prior to having to vote on this levy. So they would like to know how that was decided or would be decided. Third Thirdly, the fact that the baseball is getting the majority of the funding. Most people I have talked to is not opposed to the fact that new baseball fields are needed. You know, many of them have had children themselves that have been involved in the baseball program in the past, and some do today. But they were just wondering, you know, why was so much put before the baseball versus other things like possibly the second sheet of ice for the arena. So those were the questions, and I'll sit down and listen to responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kendall, for those questions. Mr. Titterington, would you like to tackle those?
If you don't, I will.
You're ready.
Okay. Question about the clubhouse. I think I wrote these all down correctly. Is the clubhouse itself is $1.25 million. These are based on very preliminary conservative estimates from the architect that is assessing the condition of that building. Her initial estimate is that if we were to build a completely new building to the standard that, you know, is current, state of the art, et cetera, it would probably be closer to $2 million. The $1.25 million takes the building that we have, which is a very solid building. It's just dated. It needs some new mechanical, plumbing, electric, and that kind of thing. That's where the $1.25 million comes from. You know, we're confident enough that that's the number that we included on the spreadsheet to move forward and have discussion. The question about prorating, that's a difficult one. You know, and it's particularly difficult to try to say, well, if we don't get enough money, then this is what we're going to do and this is what we're not going to do, because it puts the cart before the horse. It assumes that with, you know, Operation Recreation saying that they are going to do all the marketing, the legwork, the fundraising, et cetera, you know, it almost starts to set them up for failure. Before it's even gone on the ballot, been certified to go on the ballot, it's as if they're starting behind the eight ball, if you will. And so, you know, that is a difficult question to answer. Other than, I guess the most general answer I can give is that ultimately is up to the council. What you certify, you know, you're going to have some legislation, if this goes with whatever amount, to recommend projects to go out to bid. You'll have to do that by resolution. You'll have to also, by ordinance, then vote to bond whatever amount. And as you're doing that, you'll be able to discuss the detailed components of each project that's in there. And if 14.8 becomes 12 million or 10 million or whatever, you know, we'll give you our best recommendation. And again, I can tell you that our first cut will be how can we scale it back across the board, because we have multiple projects, and get within that the number that we have to work with. But to give specifics is really impossible to do at this point. But like I said before, at some point, prorating may not work, or if the money is just not there where we can do a project to improve the amenity, then one of the recommendations maybe from us is that we just do nothing and we leave that property alone and continue to farm it until such time as we're ready to look at it again. But to try to answer that now is impossible. It really is.
And we can rescind the levy at that point if the
We
levy
can.
is passed.
Yes, we can. We did confirm that with the state of Ohio.
Right.
The third question is the ball fields. There's so much being allocated to it, to that project or that part of the project versus other things. The ball fields, as Mr. Phillips and others have said in the past, that is the most critical, immediate need. Other than having the land there, the raw land, if you will, there's so much that needs to be done to go from farmland to a complete complex that it is the lion's share of the cost estimate. When we look at the ball fields versus a second sheet of ice, for example, second sheet of ice is one that would serve a specific special interest. It is something that we would like to have. It is, the issues with the ice out at the arena are nowhere near what they are with the baseball fields. As Mr. Phillips said, every year there are tens of thousands of dollars in maintenance costs from damage that's done to the fields. In the past, they have been able to rely on private donations, foundations, grants, etc. The two major sources of which have told them that we've spent probably hundreds of thousands at this point over the past 2 decades or more, and they can't afford to do that. There are too many other priorities. So again, that's where the immediacy comes in. So to compare that to the second sheet of ice at $7+ million or more for the second sheet of ice, based on the analysis that was done, there was no way to include that in this kind of project.
Going back to the scaling down, if we don't make enough money, all of that, Mr. Phillips possibly might be able to answer this as well. When are we going to know how much money we have? So we get the bond money in, we've got that portion. When's the deadline for this is how much we have? We either have to scale it back or not.
Well, if the levy was successful, you mean? Any additional money on top of that? Is that where you're going?
Yep. So we're looking at whether we have to scale this thing back or not. How much money do we have in the end? We've got the levy money coming in. We've got the bond money here. How do we know when the fundraising portion is done?
Well, we've had kind of a soft beginning, and we have not raised a dime yet, officially, for the Operation Recreation levy. However, we're going to make a couple of presentations soon, in the next couple of months, and we should know something then. But the way that we're approaching it is for a personal or corporate pledge is to be a 3 to 5 year process. Just for the sake of numbers, say we ask somebody to give $1 million over 5 years, that's $200,000 per. So that's kind of the approach. Okay. So whether it's $1 million or whether it's $5,000, it would be in that vein of whatever the organization or person could do to contribute to the project. So it's a 3 to 5 year window.
Okay. And the timeline is we're not going to start any construction until we know how much money we're going to be getting from those organizations.
Correct. Well, I mean, that would be my assumption. I can't speak for the city. But we're going to be, if the levy is successful in the election, you're always collecting a year in arrears. So you're going to have a year wait until that happens. So that gives us a year to get really moving on the fundraising end of things. But we don't know. I mean, it's a big question because we just don't know yet.
Right.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that, the levy passes in November. We would be able to start collecting in 2017, and so once we did that, once the election is over, assuming that the levy would pass, then we would finalize detailed drawings and designs and get everything as ready as possible. We would only bring to you a project with the amount of money that we know we've got at that point.
Okay.
The hope is that while the marketing is going on, while the Operation Recreation is handling the education process, at the same time they're doing fundraising. Ultimately, I'm not on that committee, don't want to be on that committee. Probably would be a conflict for me to be on that committee, but ideally, going into the November election, having as much of committed, whether it's a multi-year commitment or a commitment in 1 year, would benefit everybody and would probably serve the entire project a lot better than if it was left open for a long period of time.
Yeah. It would be tough to know if we need to scale it back unless we know how much we're getting.
That's correct.
Right. Yes. Mr. Terwilliger.
John Twilliger, one of your council persons at large.
You have your
I've
address,
had-
please? Can you state your address, please?
Sure, 1145 Cloverdale in
Thank you.
Troy.
Appreciate that.
A comment on my part is that a lot of what this project wants to accomplish, I think, has merit. It's a quality of life issue. I spent 9 years on the Troy Junior Baseball Board, and some of those Saturdays get real long. But a comment that I have been asked, which I think we need to ask council, one of which, how do we ask the taxpayers of Troy to fund a project where a percentage of the participants, and I don't know the percentage, do not live within Troy, come from outside communities? There are entities within the use of these facilities who are tryout, play for, pay for, who are not Troy residents. How do we justify spending Troy taxpayer monies to kind of subsidize the recreation of persons or people outside of the boundaries of Troy? And the second question, is there a plan or a method where some of these programs that have the potential to generate revenue will be required to replenish or generate revenue to offset some of these costs? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Terwilliger. I think the first question, that happens a lot. There are people that come out from outside the city limits that use the Troy Park, different things like that.
Well, I guess the easiest way is, you're absolutely correct, that, with our recreation programs now, the baseball program that does happen in the fields that are here, we do bring teams from outside of Troy. The soccer program, we have a tournament. We have teams from all over the Miami Valley, all over the state, that come in, weekly for those programs. So it happens now. And the taxpayers do pay for that as a quality of life issue that is primarily overwhelmingly for the Troy youth, as well as, if you look at the senior citizens, for example. The membership in the Senior Citizens Center, 75% are, or more, are in the Troy zip code. That's as narrow as we can make it. But we do have, according to their leadership, about 100 members that are outside of the Troy zip code. It's still a Troy amenity. It's still there for Troy citizens. So, I guess that's the answer to the first question, unless there's a follow-up question. Those groups or uses that will generate revenue, for example, the driving range. We're not going to be giving away free range balls. The revenues that are generated through additional tournaments or additional play out at the golf course will benefit the golf course and the golf course fund, which will then stabilize, possibly reduce, or, God forbid, eliminate a subsidy from the general fund, which happens every year. So that benefits the taxpayers. The driving range revenue themselves would be able to come back and offset some of the city's contribution as part of that private non-levy amount that's reflected in this overall project. So that would be able to be attributed to this project, and that was the plan. Groups that come in, if there are private tournaments that want to use the complex, our expectation is that we would have contracts in place that would have revenue sharing as part of that arrangement. Those groups that maybe can't help offset the capital costs, then we go to in-kind services where they're volunteer groups are helping to maintain, keep up with the restroom, concessions facilities, what have you. So we will have arrangements in place, and we are not giving this away in the backs of the taxpayers.
If I might add.
Yes, Mr. Phillips.
Directly to Mr. Terwilliger, and one of the groups that is on the Operation Recreation Committee is the Midwest Ohio Baseball. I will say that Mr. Westfall also sits on the Miracle League board for the handicapped baseball field. His initial involvement was strictly to get a handicap accessible baseball field built in Troy. No other, it was all altruism. That was his only motivation behind getting involved with Miracle League. When the scope grew with the Troy Junior Baseball and the Operation Recreation, he said, well, why don't we throw his business, the Midwest Ohio Baseball, in, because it's an economic development driver, it's a tool. Right now, he doesn't use any fields in the city of Troy for his organization. He has a field at his residence just north of town here, north of the Hewells Camp property, and they have rented city fields around. They have the ability to put on tournaments with 200 to 300 baseball teams if that was something that could be done here in Troy. The Troy Junior facility is not conducive to his because of lack of lights and some other things. That is the reason that he is on that. But at this moment, he has no monetary motivation other than to say, hey, I'm a developer here in town. He's moving into the Shaughnessy building that he purchased from the city 2 years ago. So his residence is going to be changing to a Troy resident instead of out in the township. But he is just a big proponent as an economic development tool that this is worthwhile and lent his business name to that. But other than that, he's not made a nickel off of, or cost a nickel off of city facilities.
And the new facilities that are proposed are going to be able to handle the tournaments that he has.
Absolutely, because of the amount of time that they'll be able to use because of lighting and other things. I mean, it's doubles your daytime.
If you're looking at 200 teams, how many people does that bring to a town?
Oh, at a minimum, that's 9 people per team. At a minimum, so figure 1 to 2 people on the outside of that, and relatives, friends, and the additional players, coaches, whatever. I mean, the numbers are very easy to extrapolate out there to a big number.
Right. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes. Mr. Tremblay.
I did have a question. I think Mr. Terwilliger, he asked about youth being served for baseball from being outside of Troy. You mentioned a team coming out. I think what I took it as is a child who lives outside the city limits of Troy but goes to a Troy school, he would play baseball. But where he lives, that would not be his parents' property taxes would not help build it. That's what he was talking about, I think. But
Well,
how do we deal
and
with
we're
soccer?
gathering that information. They're mid-season, so we're trying to get some of that information. We may actually have it, but we'll forward it to you. But our understanding and the preliminary numbers that we had seen, that is an extremely low amount. That organization primarily serves Troy youth. There may be, a few of those circumstances, but it's very minor.
We're doing that already with soccer. The child could live
That's correct.
outside of the city limits, but also participate in our recreational leagues.
That's correct.
The only place that you would have that where you could restrict it to Troy residents would be through the school systems as Troy residents. So that's where you'd have a real handle on it. You may not be able to control it 100% because of transfers in and that sort of thing. But in a recreation league, the townships don't have the facilities or the money to put together recreational leagues. I mean, who does that? The cities, Tip, Troy, and Piqua. And we are a quarter of the county's population right here. So most of our folks are here.
Yes, Mrs. Oda.
I don't see that we're going to answer all the questions that there are. I think at this point, we're really just trying to decide if we're going to allow it on the ballot, and I would encourage the residents to take an active part in finding out, getting their questions answered.
Right.
Hopefully, we've answered a few. I just don't see that we're going to answer it all here and now. I don't know.
Well, and you're correct, we're not deciding to pass this and make it happen. We're just putting it up there to let the citizens decide whether they want it or not.
Yeah. And as many times as I have people say, let us vote.
Yep.
This is one of them.
Hi. Please approach and state your name and address, please.
Debbie Char, 1519 Surrey Road. I've just formulated questions as I've been sitting here today. So let me start off with a couple things. My understanding from way back when the Newt fields were designated as the Troy Junior Baseball fields, and it's been a few decades now, Troy Junior Baseball, at that time that they accepted those fields, were well aware of the situation that they were on a floodplain and it could pose a problem for them. And now, after a couple decades, the generosity of the community has kind of worn out its welcome. So we all know that they're in that particular position. One of my first questions has to do with the city, in my opinion, rushed into the purchase of Huell's Camp Farm after having turned down the offer to purchase it on at least one or two occasions previously. Rushed into it, paid a premium dollar per acreage for that land. And my concern is that Troy Junior Baseball is playing a big field in having that land purchased and being able to utilize those fields once they are constructed. And I guess my question is, Troy has a rec league. So what is Troy Junior Baseball's plan going forward? Are they going to fold into the Troy Rec League? Or are they going to rent the fields from the city like any other organization that wants to come in and use them? Because it seems to me that if we, as citizens, are going to pay for a field and then allow a private organization to use those fields, we're kind of letting a private organization take advantage of the rest of the taxpayers' dollars. And that was really my understanding under the purpose, besides what I call challenger baseball, because I'm a baseball person. My kids both played baseball all the way through college. We're big supporters of baseball. My children have been involved in what we call a challenger league before, which is what Mr. Phillips has referred to as a miracle league here in Troy. So we're very familiar with that concept. We're very familiar with that process. And it's not that I'm not supportive of it. I'm just concerned in that we are once again doing something that involves the taxpayer dollar where we don't have a clear vision of what we're going to do. When I was approaching the age of 16 and I wanted a car, my father said to me, "You raise your half and then you come to the bank of Dad and I will talk to you about getting you the rest of it." So I guess my position would be the timing of this levy on the November ballot is not good. We have a school ballot that's coming forward, and I would hate to be in conflict with the children on an educational level so that we can do something on a recreational level. Not that this isn't good for the quality of life, I just think the timing is bad, and I would suggest to this Operation Recreation, or whatever the organization is called, you go out and you start doing your work. You go out and start earning your money and you raise your fund. And then you come back to us and show us what you have. Because if the city can't come to the citizens and say, this is our plan, it can't be premature to say we don't know what percentage is going to go to the golf course and what percentage is going to go to the fields and what percentage is going to the Senior Citizen Center. You have to be able to tell the people clearly what you're going to do. We knew going into Hobart Arena and Treasure Island, and when I say we, I mean you all sitting here, knew that the cost was much higher than what was presented to the city or to the citizens. And instead, we came in and lowballed it to the community and have gone back to the well on more than one occasion for additional funds. And I think the citizens need to have a better transparency of what the plan is and how we're using the money. And just in this meeting alone, Mr. Tittering had said we're only going to bring projects to the table for the funds that we have, but yet 5 minutes prior to that, he said we'll bond out for what we need so we can borrow it so we can get the project underway. It's that kind of mixed message that the citizens just can't be clear about what your objective is and how you're going to do things. And I think we have to be better stewards of the money and how we do it. Not that I'm against any of these projects. I just think we need to do our due diligence in planning and organizing and being accountable for how we're going to get them done instead of having a lot of pie in the sky ideals about doing them. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to have a lot more people come on board when you have a clear picture of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. But I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that Troy Junior Baseball pays for the use of the fields. Otherwise, they fold, they provide their assets to the city, and they become a free participant like the rec league, where they just pay, where each of the participants of the league pays for their participation. There's got to be a clear understanding of how Troy Junior Baseball is going to be able to utilize those fields. That's all I have.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Titterington.
There was a lot there that, and I'm going to try to remember everything because I really disagreed with most of what was said, and maybe that was because it's gotten lost in all the questions and the answers, and there's a communication issue. But first of all, it's my understanding that Troy Junior Baseball is the baseball program in Troy. Mr. Seiler's not here. I'm not aware of the rec board running a separate baseball program. So this is not as if Troy Junior Baseball is a separate private entity that's coming in and wants to use our fields for free. That's not the way it is. It has been at New Field forever, decades at least. Prior to that, I understand we had a basic program that was in Troy until the new farm was made available to them. As far as vision is concerned, I think we've articulated that vision that we have. Not aware of multiple attempts or offers to purchase the Hewells Camp Farm. I'm only aware of one. Been here 10 years. Did we pay a premium? Yes, but we recognized that ultimately, as an addition to Duke Park and creating Duke Park North, if you will, and the fact that we were able to offset a large majority of the cost of that, even at a premium, made it something that the council felt was more beneficial than the net costs that the city would ultimately have to absorb. The riverfront projects, the only time that we've come back to the well, if you will, is when we got the bids for the arena project, and it turned out that the construction atmosphere was a couple $1 million higher than we thought. There haven't been multiple returns to you. We have not asked for one dime more than we asked for authorization for the Marina Building and Treasure Island. That project is and will come in within the original budget allocation that you authorized to us. As far as timing, and I think Mr. Phillips had already mentioned the timing of this versus waiting. There are a lot of elements here. There is a sense of urgency with regards to the baseball organization. It's not something that we created. It's something that, as a grassroots organization, they have been attempting to just get through the seasons as they have come as a volunteer group. And so, the ability for them to space it out and plan it out over a multiple period of time, could we sit back in our armchair and look 5 years ago and say, well, why didn't they start planning this 5 years ago? Sure, we could ask that question, but it's not going to, it's not going to do any good. We're not going to get an answer that's relevant, to be honest. As far as the schools and coming and expecting that there will be a school levy next year, that is now the second time that I've heard this, and that is in conflict with the State of the Schools address that was made 2 weeks ago. And for anybody who was there, the superintendent did a very nice job of discussing the age of the schools, the condition of the schools, some preliminary assessment of the needs to just modernize the schools that are there, namely $55 million just to update the mechanical systems in the schools. And at the time, he did make it quite clear that, number one, the schools are not falling down. They've done an excellent job, and I think we can all agree, and continue to do an excellent job in maintaining those schools. They do have solid bones, as solid as the Miami Shores Clubhouse, certainly. And during that address, Mr. Herman did state that next year, after they've just, I believe, approved an architect to come in and do a detailed analysis of all the schools and look at their position and the cost benefit of renovations versus replacements. There's a lot of elements that they're going to look at, but he did say that in 2017, what his intention is to bring groups, focus groups, if you will, of folks together, present those design plans, and then look at and talk to them and get some feedback on which direction that they want to go in. A property tax levy is only one of those options. In all probability, that will be part of the ultimate solution, no doubt. But suddenly, we're jumping ahead, and if we wait, or if the Operation Recreation group waits, or if some other group waits, ultimately there could be a lot of other things that are on the ballot at the same time. And again, Operation Recreation, the primary need is the baseball fields. It is almost 90% of the total project. The only and there is that urgency because of the condition of the fields and where they're located. The proration idea and what we do if then, again, that's all speculation, and it's difficult for us to do that. The other statement that I want to clarify again is that, yes, I said that we would prorate things. 5 minutes prior to that, I did say bonding. I did not say that we would bond the entire $14.8 million if we were to prorate the project or consider prorating the project because we didn't get the half that is not tax levy. As a matter of fact, I think I was quite clear in saying that we would not bring a project to you for legislation unless we knew what the private funding was, if there was levy money and what that amount would be, and you would have all that laid out so that you know not to approve a project that exceeds those limits.
Thank you, Mr. Titterington. Yes, Mr.
I had a couple comments. One of them was the American Legion baseball program already uses our Parks Department field, and they're a private organization, and I think that seems to work out pretty well, just as the Troy Junior Baseball is. And thank you for clarifying the fact that we did not, there were some prices that came in higher than, we did not lowball it. We authorized $10 million to be bonded for that project, and we did not borrow any more money than that. Second thing, in the purchase of the farm, I don't ever recall that we were authorizing purchasing that farm so that we could run it as a farm. We paid too much money for it to grow soybeans. I think we all thought that we would use it for a different purpose. It happened to be in a perfect location, which is why you have to pay more than that because of location. The realtors can tell you that.
Thank you, Mr. Tremblay. Mr. Phillips?
Yep.
Oh, yes, sir. Yep. Thank you.
My name is Eddie Christ, and I live at 128 South Short Street. And I've heard a lot of comments here tonight, many of which I agree with. And I understand things are kind of headed in a direction, but sometimes we ought to step back and listen to the comments. One of them I heard was about transparency. And I've worked through the numbers for this, and maybe you can help me understand the numbers a little bit. Because there are a couple things that don't make quite fit together for me. First, I think the total project you mentioned was 14.8, and if you take out the 1.5 million that we've already paid for, that leaves 13.3. So that's kind of the bottom line number I'm looking at of what we need to fund. And the way it looks like we're planning to fund that is through a 7.5 million tax levy. But we're asking the taxpayers to come up with 10 million. So one of the questions I have is, how do we get from 7.5 to 10? And I understand there's part of that for interest. I used some interest numbers and retention fees, but I still can't get to that number. The other question I have is, I think it was mentioned that there's about a 50% partnership here, but when I look at the money, the citizens and the taxpayers. They're going to pay $10 million for a levy, and based on that spreadsheet, $1.2 million of city funds. That's a total of $11.2 million paid by the taxpayer. And the other funds that are other people that are contributing is $4 million plus $600,000. So to me, that looks like about a 71% taxpayer funded and 29% from the other. And those are the two numbers that I'm having trouble with. I would like to understand. But again, I sincerely hope this committee and the council consider the comments that they've heard tonight. Because like somebody said, we haven't raised a dime yet. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Do we have any numbers that we can give out now to help through that math, or is that something that we can get to him?
Depending on how he wants to look at it, he's not throwing bad numbers out. The approximately 7.5 million levy proceeds would be the minimum, not including contingencies, nor would it include debt service. And that's why we rounded it up to $1 million a year. The numbers that you see at the bottom of the spreadsheet show you the annual debt service of approximately $936,000. Those are estimated debt service numbers based on consultation or discussions with our bond financing, our banker, if you will, at an estimated interest rate that could be low, could be high. We think that's a conservative number, so we think we're okay there. So that's where it goes, and over a 10-year period, the interest is a significant number. It always is. I mean, we can't do anything about that. I think it's important that we include the Duke North acquisition, the Hewells Camp Farm acquisition, as part of this project. It is, without it, there is no foundation on which to build the baseball complex. So it should be in here. We have considered the city funds column non-levy amount, whether you want to call that taxpayer funded or not. I could also argue that much of that is coming from our business community and not our property owners. We can argue and debate that, for hours probably. However, the point is that is non-new property tax millage amount, that a portion of which is from the net costs of the Hewells Camp acquisition. The bottom line is that of this overall project, 50.68% is estimated to come from the levy, and a little more than 49% is other funds, whether they're foundations, grants, private donations, or city existing tax base contributions.
Thank you for that. Are there other questions from the audience at this time?
I'd like to follow up.
Yes, sir.
On the track from 10 million to 7.5 million.
Sure.
If I take the 10 million and say it's a 95% retention, that computes to 9.5 million that the city would actually collect. And if I take the 826,000 or so, it's about another million. So that brings me about $1 million that hasn't been explained. That's my question. That's my point.
Thank you. Are there any other numbers that would help explain that at this time?
I really can't. I can just tell you what our calculations showed,
Right.
which you have.
Okay. Let's, we can follow up with you, sir, and get some more information on that and maybe sit down with some of our people and work through the exact numbers. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Phillips, what's the baseball in Troy right now, sitting on new fields. Once that floods again, they're not going to have money to fix that at this time. Looks like the donors and the people that have been helping them in the future. What happens if this doesn't happen? What happens to baseball in Troy?
Well, I can't really speak to that, not being a member of their organization or in the inner circle of their finances and that sort of thing. But I would assume that they would continue to muddle through as best they can. That is about the best answer I can give you, not being knee-deep in their financial issues.
Sure. Are there any other comments from anyone in the audience here? I appreciate everyone's comments so far. I know it's a topic that we have to discuss and work through. Mrs. Oda, do you have any other questions at this time? Mr. Tremblay?
No more questions. I have no-
Okay.
Tonight.
So now it's the time where we're going to either recommend or not recommend to have this go up to council and be placed on the ballot for citizen vote. What's your pleasure, Mrs. Oda?
This is tough. I'm willing to let it go to the full council for a vote. It falls short of an endorsement. I know they would love to have an endorsement from the full council. At this point, I can't do that, but I am willing to give citizens a chance to vote on it.
So you would recommend that this be put on the ballot?
I'm letting it go to full council on Monday night.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that a non-recommendation? Is that just neutral? Is there a,
No, it's
So the
not.
answer-
You're
We're
recommending to
full
put it on the
council.
ballot.
so your recommendation is to move, okay,
I recommend we move forward to bring it in front of council.
right.
It's not like we're bringing it, and those are going to be readings, and it would be, we would know by, August 10th, whether it can be on the ballot or not.
Will this be an emergency Monday night?
I
No, it would go to 3 readings.
It'll go to wherever the
That's the
council
way the
decides.
schedule is. Of course, that's up to the council,
Right.
but
Council could suspend rules.
But there'll be plenty of time for debate between now and whether we get it on the ballot, and there'll be plenty of time after the ballot for
Right.
everyone to discuss and get more information. So I'd say move forward and bring it to council.
Sure.
Bobby, are you going to do community meetings to meet with people?
We'll probably have to do that, but, they're going to have to request it, with the information, my contact information and the other committee members that are available. So if anyone has a question or would like a presentation in front of a group as a coffee clatch or a large group, just give me a call and we'll see what we can arrange.
Sure. Okay, well, we're gonna go ahead and move forward then. Okay, Mrs. Knight, it's the recommendation of this committee to move forward with requesting to place a levy on the November 8th ballot. Are there any other items to come before us today?
No.
Okay, and we are adjourned. I appreciate the time. Thanks for the time, everybody out there.